What I deal with on a regular basis is people who never had the ability to develop true coping skills. And so when they get angry, they punch people. Or when they're depressed, they go do drugs. Young people, and men in particular, are missing good quality mentors who can help them and guide them. That's not only something that's missing, but in a lot of ways, it's a bit of a calling for us. I think a lot of police officers become task-oriented. So once the situation and the crisis is de-escalated, that's when I find a lot of people experience that emotional overflow, and it starts to pour out into their own personal lives.
You were listening to the Outweigh podcast, a show about men and masculinities, the challenges that modern men face, and how to chart a better way forward. I'm your host, Matt Howlett, mental health coach and founder of the Outweigh. This episode is a conversation with Jason Walsh, a police officer and former youth care worker. We talk about the importance of having mentors and being mentors ourselves, as well as the importance of coping skills and emotional support, both in his role as a police officer and in adolescent development. I find Jason's desire to serve and support other men and his community at large inspiring, and I hope you do too. One of the things that I like to do is just to get a brief, just Coles Notes version of who it is that I'm talking to. So give me the Coles Notes version of Jason Walsh.
The Coles Notes version of Jason Walsh. So I grew up in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Right.
What we would call probably low income. We didn't have a whole lot growing up. I grew up in a family with 3 brothers. So there was 4 boys and a single mom. My father spent the majority of his time in jail as when we were children. So most of the time when we were children, my parents were split up. When they were together, my father was an alcoholic and abusive. And so I grew up in a home where I had a powerful single mother who raised 4 boys and did a fantastic job at that, I would like to say. And she also dealt with intimate partner violence on a regular basis. And we experienced that in our homes, and we saw that in our homes. Most of my life growing up, my father was in and out of jail. And when he was around, he wasn't, fantastic or great. And but there were times, there were good times and whatnot with him. Eventually, they did decide to finally split up, and they did that. And my mother continued to raise us on her own and continued to struggle on her own to do that. We grew up utilizing food hampers and all that kind of stuff, but we made our way through, and that was by the power and grace of my mother kind of steaming forward and taking care of us. Eventually, we move out on our own. I had at some point in time in my early youth, I was probably 13 or 14. I had a kind of a religious conversion experience.
Sure.
And so that occurred at, if you remember the old Circle Square Ranch stuff, So
I do. Yeah.
I ended up going to Circle Square Ranch when I was a child, and a friend of mine, a friend of the family, had paid for that to happen for me. And so I had that religious experience there and that conversion experience there. And I spent a lot of my youth involved in the church and becoming, part of the youth group there and all that stuff. But nobody in my family was involved in that. I was the only one. I would get up on my own at 13 or 14 Sunday morning and make my way to church. And Friday night, when the rest of the people who I grew up around were out hanging out and doing their thing, I was walking to church Friday night to spend time there. So that was kind of neat. And it made a different experience for me in that church environment too. So after there, I spent some time working in BC. I ended up studying theology there for a couple of years. My intention there to do that was to become a youth minister. But after doing that for 2 years, I felt like that's not me. It's not my cup of tea.
Okay.
I never grew up in that religious world, and experiencing it when you're just surrounded by it at all times, it was a bit too much for me. And so I stepped away from that. I ended up doing about 10 years then working in child and youth care work in group homes. So I worked in residential youth care where, we've got young boys mostly living in care, sometimes due to issues that are caused by their behavior problems or their mental health diagnosis, other times due to issues involved from their parents and their poor parenting that they grew up around. So did my best to kind of support and help some young people in that capacity and some families in that capacity, and eventually moved from there to policing. And so currently I'm a police officer at the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary in St. John's. I've been there for coming close on 10 years as well. 2015 is when I started there. So time is certainly flying.
Yeah, that's what I'm really realizing here. 10 years.
Yeah. And so that was 10 years in the group homes. And I think I met you working in the group home setting.
Yeah, I think so. But I didn't realize that you did that for 10 years. I did that for about 3.
Yeah. And it was so eye opening. It was one of those careers that has changed my perspective on life, what I do. And it's something that I brought forward to policing in what I do now. A lot of times I still perceive myself as like a child and youth care worker, just that I'm dealing with people from the criminal element who never had developed the opportunity or never had the opportunity to develop the coping skills and stuff that we were trying to teach these kids in the group home setting. Now I'm dealing with them as they became adults.
Yeah.
I remember one of the big important things that I learned we used to have this model called therapeutic crisis intervention. And I taught that in that platform for a couple of years there at the place that we worked at.
Yep.
But one of the base model questions to ask yourself when dealing with someone in crisis was, how am I feeling now? And so that's something that I still to this day ask myself when I'm dealing with someone in the criminal element, when they're escalated or they're heartbroken or they're dealing with a mental health crisis. I ask myself first, how am I feeling now? Because I know that that's going to dictate how I interact with that person and what I help them kind of come up with,
Yeah, exactly. Whatever's going on with us, we bring that into the situation. It's an add-on.
We can't even help it. It just happens, right?
Yeah, but that's key, I'm sure, to be aware of that. I mean, I have to do that every time I jump on a call with a guy that, not knowing exactly where they might be at any given moment, when I'm stepping into their lives in that way. And I have to be ready, for one, to be able to kind of put on that hat and ensure that I'm in that headspace, but also that my stuff is managed and processed and under control, right? That must be even more of a challenge, though, for you specifically as a police officer. I remember what it was like as a child and youth care worker, because there were situations that were sometimes it felt like beyond our control, where like some of the guys, like I feel like there was points when they wanted to test us, right? But in your role as a police officer, I mean, tell me a little bit about that. That must be far more challenging in that role. Is that correct? Or
it certainly is. Yeah, it's way more challenging. And the implications of my interaction with someone as a police officer are oftentimes far greater than they are as what they were as a child and youth care worker. And you spoke about people trying to test your boundaries and whatnot. And that happens a lot as a police officer. A lot of times people have had bad experiences with police, or they at least perceive police as one thing, being difficult or being against them. And so my message to people is always trying to hit home that, I'm not against anybody. I just want to have a peaceful resolution to whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And sometimes sometimes it does mean that someone has to be arrested or taken into custody, and their rights and freedoms and liberties are taken away from them. Right. That's something that we take very, very seriously. And so it does become a challenge, because not only am I trying to help people cope and help people learn and help people get through a particularly difficult situation for them.
Yeah.
There are times when I physically have to take their freedoms and liberties away from them. And that, for lack of a better term, it sucks. Yeah. And it sucks for everybody involved. So it does pose an additional issue in relation to that, but it also provides good opportunity to show empathy and understanding for someone's situation and recognize that this is difficult, not just for the person who's a victim of a criminal element, but also for the perpetrator of that as well. It's difficult for everyone involved,
Yeah. How do you manage the thoughts, the feelings, emotions that are wrapped up in that type of experience? Like first on the job, but then obviously, we're all human. You take experiences like that off the job. What is that like for you? What do you do to manage that?
It is very difficult. And a lot of times what we see now, I'm part of our critical incident stress management team at work and our peer support network at work as well. And so part of what we're doing is trying to recognize the fact that not only do we experience high trauma situations and difficult situations, but we also have to look after each other and take care of one another. Mm-hmm. It can be a challenge to experience something, but I think a lot of police officers, and myself included, we become task oriented when we're in the middle of that crisis situation. And so in many ways, you downplay your emotional state at that point in time because you can't let that control you. So we become task oriented. So I know that person A has to be moved away from person B. And so that's my task. And I focus on that. But those emotional aspects can overflow on you afterwards. So once the situation and the crisis is de-escalated and it's down, that's when I find a lot of people experience that emotional overflow, and it starts to pour out into their own personal lives. And so as part of what we're doing now at the RNC and in other organizations is trying to focus on helping people with that overflow of emotions and that overflow of experience and trauma, because you can't cope with that every single day and just bury it away and expect that things are going to be fine after a 25-year career of experiencing trauma and vicarious trauma through other people's issues as well. And expect that you'll be fine. So we're trying our best to cope with people or help people kind of co-regulate a little bit, and also learn how to regulate on their own and find their own methods of coping, I guess.
So what does that look like specifically? Is that only therapy? Like, I'm assuming all RNC officers have access to, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever it is that they might need, counselors. What does that look like for you? What do you find works best?
Yeah. And so first of all, just to mention, we do all have access to therapy and counselors on a regular basis. We actually have an on-site psychologist who is amazing and provides great opportunity to speak to people. And that's not just open for police officers. It's open for anyone who works with our organization. So that's fantastic. But personally, it's my family that keeps me whole. So I've got two awesome young boys who I enjoy spending as much time with as I can. And they are what keeps me whole. And that and some fitness, so I've got a little gym set up in my basement. When I get a half hour, I'll work out there, or I'll go for a run or something like that. So it's simplistic for me, but it's the small things that really make a big difference. It's paying attention to my immediate family, recognizing what's going on with them and the importance of spending time with them, as well as some physical fitness stuff. And for me, that has tended to work. A couple of years ago, my wife had kind of mentioned to me, like, you're on edge a little bit more. You seem a little bit more stressed out. And so I did. I set up an EAP appointment and I worked through some things there, and they helped me kind of cope through some of the things that I was challenging and not even realizing, but I'm bringing things home. Then the emotional trauma that I experienced at work and the problems that I see at work, and I'm bringing them home. And I don't even realize I'm carrying those things.
Of course.
And so, just a couple of EAP sessions, and I was able to kind of work through some of those things. And that's been fantastic. And it's a recognition for me to do that.
Yeah. What is EAP?
It's an employee assistance program. So basically anybody within the government of Newfoundland and Labrador has the ability to kind of reach out to their EAP program, which is employee assistance program. And they'll be able to provide a number of therapy sessions for that person based on their needs. Yeah.
Okay. I assumed that existed within the RNC. I never knew the specifics of it. Like, as you know, like, my mother worked in the chief's office for about 27 years before she passed. And I'd never mentioned that to me, but that was also something that wasn't discussed a whole lot in our family. And that's a whole other discussion, like mental health, mental well-being, just check-ins. How are you? You know what I mean? Yeah. Not how are the things, you know what I mean? Like, what do you need for school? What do you need for the sports thing that you're in or whatever? But it's not a big conversation, I find. I feel like that's changing. I don't know if you listened to the episode with my good friend Matt Dennis. We talked about fathering a fair bit, and we find that the conversation is changing, and that is one of the main reasons behind this podcast, is to kind of encourage that conversation to continue, to grow, to expand, to inspire people to have these conversations and to think about things like this, to think about their mental well-being and to figure out what it is that can work for them. You mentioned just a few minutes ago when you're talking about the challenges that you see in policing, specifically related to younger folks that you come across and then seeing them later on in life, coping skills. What do you see as the main issue there? I mean, you can speak to men and women, but obviously I'm interested in what is it that young men are missing that leads them down that path where you've run into them at 16, 17, and now you're again running into them at 26, 27, in their 30s, similar struggles. What is it what's missing?
Yeah, and that's such a difficult question to
Of
answer
course. Yeah.
because for each person, individually, their life is so different than ours. But I can tell you from my experience what that was for me and what helped get me on that path. And I think it translates to many of the people that I deal with on a regular basis. One, I think, is mentors. Young people and men in particular are missing mentors in life, good quality mentors who can help them and guide them in particular paths in life and good positive paths. That's not only something that's missing, but in a lot of ways, Matt, it's a bit of a calling for us as men ourselves to make sure that we're being positive mentors and leaders for other
Absolutely.
people.
Yeah.
So when I think back to, I tell you a little bit about my family history and whatnot, but one of the biggest mentors that I ever had in my life was one of the times when my father was in prison, in a federal prison. He ended up meeting the chaplain there. So he was having his own kind of spiritual,
awakening
issues or awakening or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And so he speaks to the chaplain there, and the chaplain became friends with our family. So he's still one of my best friends today. And I was only 2 years old when he first met my family, but he took on that role of a mentor for me and helped me understand myself and helped me understand that my path is not determined by my family history and that my destiny is not written in the stars. And so sometimes I think that young people, to get back to the question, need that. They need someone who's a good, positive mentor in their life. And it only takes one person, just one, to be that good, positive mentor and lead them in the right direction. Another thing is like I mentioned, coping skills. Some basic coping skills being developed, preferably at a younger age, is what people need. Because what I see, what I deal with on a regular basis from a criminal element is people who never had the ability or the lessons or the opportunity to develop true coping skills, because we all need them. Like I mentioned before, I hang out with my kids or I'll go for a workout or whatever it is that works for me, but they never develop those things. And so when they get angry, they punch people, or when they're frustrated at their wife, they hit her, or, when they're depressed, they go do drugs. So those become their poor coping skills. And then that leads to police intervention oftentimes. And so that's a couple of the huge things I think people need. So, mentorship, coping skills, discipline, responsibility. A lot of young people that I deal with now, they're not responsible for anything. There's no job for them, or there's no family. Like right now, I have, my responsibility is my family. Number one, that will always come first. But even as a younger person, there was other responsibilities that I took on, working at Circle Square Ranch as a leader there, or a summer job or whatever. But I see a lot of people who are responsible-less, if that makes any sense. They don't have anything to tie themselves down to help take care of, because a lot of times we're better at taking care of other people or other things than we are at taking care of ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we have something or someone to be responsible for or responsible with, then I think that'll help us develop those skills as well. So those are some of the things that I see as missing in young men today,
Yeah, that reminds me of it's a chapter in one of Jordan Peterson's book. I like the guy. I think he's extremely intelligent and well-spoken. I don't agree with everything the man says, but there are some great stuff in that book. And one of the chapters is basically about learning to take care of yourself as if you were responsible for, in the way that you're responsible for someone else. And I'm roughly paraphrasing, but I can't remember the exact name of the title, but that's the concept, exactly what you just said. Like when we are, like say when my mother was sick, my siblings did more of that because I was living away, but she was very sick and, it was late stage cancer. And so we were doing everything and anything that we could. And, like I said, they did a lot more than I did. I wasn't here until towards the end of that, but that's what you do, right? You have a schedule, when the pills have to go, with food or without, with what, you know what I mean? Like all those specific details we can be so anal about those things when it comes to someone else, but for ourselves, and especially as men, we just learn to push things down rather than deal with them, rather than learn the coping skills, right? To deal with them. And so much, I think, of what you just talked about is like that internal turmoil. A lot of what I talked about actually with Cortez on episode 5 about building mental fitness. It's the thoughts and the feelings and the heavy, strong emotions that we just don't know what to do with it. Right.
Yeah. And I often wonder why it is that we, as men, we kind of want to hold things back. And I don't know if that's just part of our makeup or if it's something that's been taught to us or if it's a combination of both. But there is definitely a part of us that wants to hold things back. And even me, as someone who's trying to take on an important role at my work and in my family, as someone who's a supportive person who's open about conversations, even I want to hold back sometimes. And I think, suck it up, Jason, and move on. And sometimes you do have to do that, at a low level. But we need to recognize what we're feeling and what we're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Back to the what people are missing as well is, remember that first question I said about I ask myself, what am I feeling now? I don't think anybody ever does that, or not enough people. We don't ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
And men don't have, I'm sure there's research on it, I just don't know it, but men don't have a strong emotional vocabulary. A lot of men, it's angry or pissed off or sad or well, that's about it. It's like we don't have an emotional vocabulary. And if we can mention those things and label them and say, okay, geez, I am feeling depressed right now, or I am feeling sad right now, or I am frustrated right now. Sometimes just labeling those things and recognizing them will help you make better decisions, right?
Yeah. Well, it's self-knowledge, right? It's learning more about yourself, discovering more about yourself. And I'm going to plug another episode just because it's such a perfect fit for what you're talking about. And I think it's episode 2 with Dr. Ron Johnson called Balls, because that's the title of his book. And I love it. I
haven't picked that up yet. I'm going to have to get that at some point.
Yeah. Honestly, I was saying to one of the last guests I was chatting with recently that he's just one of those guys that has so much knowledge and experience, but also has the ability to bring it down a level. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I've met folks that are very intellectual and, I've done a master's degree. I've been in that world a little bit, and I've come across people that I don't always understand them when they're trying to relay things to me. It's on the PhD level. And I get lost after a couple concepts, a couple sentences in. I'm like, okay, can you just go back, but Ron's got this way of just bringing it, where the rubber meets the road, helping you understand. And that's one of the biggest things in his book is men finding courage with words. You know what I mean? The ability to say, I am sad. They feel angry because that might be the first, just knee-jerk reaction. Something upset them, but they're actually sad. You know what I mean? If someone was to come in to the room right now where I'm, having this conversation with you and interrupt me, I'd be angry. But ultimately, that's sadness because I'm enjoying this conversation. I had put this on the schedule. I've been looking forward to this. I enjoy the process of this. You're taking something away from me. You know what I mean? Something you said a few minutes ago made me want to ask you about the support systems that are in place so that young men and young women, of course, as well, get the whatever you want to call it, education, training that they actually need to learn these coping skills. And you're more familiar with the support systems that are in place. Can you speak to that a little bit? Do you see them as existing but somewhat broken? Is there more that's required there to provide the support that's needed?
Yeah. First, before I answer that, I want to mention about your comment about feeling sadness and how men mostly respond with anger or they feel angry. The mentor that I had mentioned before, he was, my personal mentor. He was a doctor in psychotherapy as well. And I remember growing up and dealing with some of my emotional issues. What he told me, something that I always remembered, was that almost every single emotion, when you don't know how to deal with it, turns into anger. So I don't know how well that translates these days, but he said, almost every emotion, whether it's overt happiness, if you don't know how to deal with it and you don't know how to put it forward, eventually it's going to come out as anger. And I don't know. Anyway, that was something that made me interested. But with regards to what's out there for people, there are tons of resources out there for people to help them with their mental health and to help them learn how to cope and develop things. There are a lot of government offered support systems out there. If you were to go on, there's a website called Bridge the Gap with two P's, spelled like an app,
Okay.
Bridge the Gap. That provides tons of supports for young people. There are tons of supports out there. It's just reaching out for them, I think, is a difficult thing for people to do. And obviously, we need more, and we need to develop more supports and to kind of reach people at a grassroots level and where they are, because what we probably know is that people aren't coming to us to reach out for these supports.
Right.
If you present them in front of them or in the school system, then they're probably more likely to be connected with them. But there are supports out there, like I said, that bridge the gap. There's our mental health crisis line that anyone can avail of at any point in time, and that's just here in town. I believe that most places throughout our country have those support systems, but there is obviously something missing in regards to how people are accessing them. So I don't think young people specifically, or men who are my age, 40 or more, they're not reaching out for these things. Maybe if they present themselves in front of them, they might have a look at that and say, oh, maybe I need it. But a lot of times they're not reaching out. And so we need to find a way. If there's something broken with relation to this, I think it's finding a way to reach them where they are in the kind of grassroots.
Yeah. So they're not reaching out, but they're also, probably, not to be more specific, not reaching out early enough.
100%. Yeah.
Right. Because again, with the episode with Cortez, the conversation we had there is that things just kind of, they snowball. It's this big domino effect where you have some feelings and some emotions that aren't being processed. And like you said, they can often go towards anger, especially for men. But I would imagine over a period of, say, 10 years of, these maladaptive patterns and behaviors just develops into a situation where they end up running into law enforcement.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just earlier today, I had my kids down to Bowring Park. We were down there playing around, and one of my kids asked me, have you ever had to shoot your gun? And I said, well, I shoot it sometimes at training, but thankfully, I've never had to shoot my gun at somebody.
Yeah.
And he said, do you know anybody who has? And I said, yeah, I do, unfortunately. And then it led to a question of like, why would somebody do something that caused a police officer to fire their gun? And so we just had this cool conversation, me and my son, about how when we don't learn how to cope with our emotions and cope with life's issues, that sometimes we can justify very dangerous or very poor decisions based on the fact that we've had bad experiences in the past. And so that led to a conversation about how someone can justify going into a store and robbing it because they feel like they need money or they deserve something.
Right.
And that's a maladaptive process, and it's not something that's helpful to that person, but they've learned to justify it. And so when a young person gets early intervention, is able to learn to cope with emotions, able to learn how to develop those skills early, then they're going to make better decisions in life. And I really think early intervention is the best possible option for people. But we still need to learn how to reach out to people who are 40 plus years old, because it's not their fault they never had those opportunities younger in life,
Yeah. Yeah. I find that one of the biggest issues is the not reaching out aspect. Because, I asked about the support systems because I know you're definitely more familiar than I am, but I've lived in a couple different places, and I'm well aware that these support systems generally exist just about everywhere. Yeah. Some are better than others. Obviously, some are, lacking in funding and not quite able to do the job that they need to do and whatever. But it seems to be the biggest challenge is people not reaching out. And again, especially men, we don't want to, again, it goes back to the conversation about, the lack of emotional vocabulary and the willingness to talk about feelings and emotions. I don't want to go to a therapist because I'm admitting that I'm weak, or I'm admitting that I'm struggling, or I'm admitting that I haven't figured something out quite yet.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that we're starting to get to a point in society where we're getting away from that mindset. We've probably got a long way to go yet, but for the most part, even in the policing world, people are more open to talking, more open to reaching out. When I facilitate some of our, critical incident stress management debriefings, we have seen more people coming to those over the last couple of years than used to go, because even within our world, it was one of those things of just like shake it off and move on to the next call. But now we see more people becoming involved in them, labeling their emotions, recognizing the impact of that trauma. And so I think it's a slow trickle down effect, but we are, as long as we continue on this trajectory and we continue to push mental health and talking about our well-being, because our well-being, like Cortez was saying in your conversation last episode, that it's much more than just mental. It's your physical, your mental, your emotional, your spiritual well-being. All those things are important, and we can't ignore either one of them.
Yeah. We've got to take a holistic approach to ourselves for sure, and recognize that everything is connected, and everything has a level of importance that we don't often, give it. But I was just about to ask you something, and it totally left my brain.
It'll come back.
It'll come back? It doesn't always come back, Jason.
No, we're at that age, right? Yeah, we're at that age.
This is what it was. I can think of, sadly, only one story of someone that I've worked with in child and youth care, and even someone that I've just kind of come across that have, their life is not exactly the way that they would want it. And maybe they don't see it that way at the moment, but they're not making great choices. They're in a rough spot. I can think of one story where those support systems that exist really worked quite well. And I came across this person, a few years later. I'm not sure exactly what the timeline was, but at least I want to say 5 years. And things had taken a turn for the better, making good decisions. And I never had the chance to have a conversation with this person and see, because I'd love to interview them right now, to be honest.
Right.
I'd love to see. So what exactly worked for you? Was it the fact that you finally did ask someone for help? Or was it all the little bits of lessons, all the times that people tried to help you out, something stuck along the way and you just started making better decisions? Is there a story, obviously anonymously, that you can share where it does work when someone reaches out, or when someone is approached with an offer for help?
Yeah, I think just about always it works in some capacity. I think what we need to recognize is how our perception of success dictates how we view that person and how it worked. So, by example, for some people that we worked with in the youth care setting, in the group home setting, just not being arrested for them was success. And so I have encountered young people that I used to work with. They're not young people anymore. It was almost 20 years ago that I was working in that field, which sounds crazy.
Yeah, it's a bit wild. We're going to skip over that. Keep going.
We're going to skip over that. Yeah. So I've encountered people who I worked with when they were in group homes, when they were 12, 13 years old, huge, mental health issues, no coping, violence coming out of them in every corner. And I've responded to calls where they've been there, and we see each other when we walk into the door, and immediately there's this connection. And they look at me and they say, "Jason, I didn't know you were doing this." I'm like, "How you doing, Matt?" And we'll just talk, and immediately that de-escalates things because we've established a connection already.
Yeah.
But some of those people, there's some now that I still go out for coffee with every now and then. I've been at his wedding, at his
that's amazing.
His diaper party for his kid. There's another one that I see on a regular basis as we're walking around. He lives in the downtown area. Every time I see him, I stop, say hello to him. I've got people who have gone into policing themselves. I know of at least one person who, I worked with in the residential group home setting who is, gone into policing himself.
Wow.
So there's tons of success stories. We don't often see them because you don't hear about the success stories a whole lot. And maybe that's part of the issue as well. Maybe we focus a little bit too much on the negative things that people are doing and experiencing, and not enough on the positive things, because statistically, it's probably less likely that in the eyes of, someone educated, that these young people we work with will be quote unquote successful, because they're not going to have university degrees or they're not going to have a 6-figure job. But a lot of them, success is just not being arrested and not being a drug addict.
Yeah.
Like that's success for those people.
Yeah.
And yeah, so sometimes I think that maybe we need to focus on some of those things, but I have seen firsthand success for many of these people. And when I look at them and I think, what did that for them? There was some determination within them that they wanted to be successful, but also they had at least one good person around them who was able to help them move forward and make good decisions. It's got to be so much tougher for someone who doesn't even have that. They're already dealing with their own problems, and then they have to go home to two parents who are drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever. Like that's got to be the real struggle for people, I think.
Yeah, I have a hard time putting myself in that position because I feel that I grew up primarily without a male role model. And I shared a little bit of that story in the first episode where I kind of introduced myself and the reason behind the podcast and how it all came to me. But, my father was in the picture, but he really didn't have what he needed in order to really fulfill that role for me. You know what I mean? He didn't finish high school. His father died when he was quite young and had a very big family. I believe it was 16 or 17 kids. And I felt like I kind of grew up, getting bits and pieces from the different people in my life. But I'm glad to hear of your story of chaplain, right? Yeah. That became a friend of your family through your father's experience. And I feel like I never really had that. I had bits and pieces. Like Ron actually for me has been, I guess, with me since I met him around 2011. So it's been like that. He's probably him and then my buddy Matt Dennis. So there's people that have been there and been helpful and supportive, played those roles for, considerable amounts of time. But I can't imagine. I can't imagine what it would be like. Because like I said, I did 3 years with you in youth care. And I have a very good memory of a lot of those young men that we worked with and seeing bits and pieces of their lives and just being like, wow, like, I remember having conversations with some of them like, man, I can't really put myself in your shoes. My experience is quite different, but that sounds ridiculously challenging. And, I felt, I think sometimes ill-equipped really, or at least that I wanted to be able to do more and couldn't because I was just one person. You know what I mean? There was so much about their lives that really needed a little bit more support, but I only saw them, you know what I mean? Every once in a while or whatever it was.
Yeah. And and that's the important part of it too, is like, we can't fix everything. We can't make everything perfect, but we can support somebody in small ways. Yeah. And I think those small supports make a big difference. One of the people that I still deal with now, I don't know why I thought about this, but, one of the people that I still see now on a regular basis, and I stop and talk to him all the time. His whole family, we have great conversations. If I'm working, we'll sit down and have a coffee. But I remember as a kid, when he was in the group home setting with me, I like country music. Don't hold it against me. But I was listening to a country song while we were driving. And the song was, I can't remember the exact lyrics, but it said something along the lines of, if you're going through hell, keep on moving, don't slow down. If you're scared, don't show it. You might get out before the devil knows you're there. Something like that. All right. And so I played this whole song for the kid, and he just bawled. He bawled his eyes out. And I just thought like he was going to make fun of me for listening to this country song. Right. But for him, it was about the fact that he's going through hell and there's a way out of this hell. And I might make my way out of this hell at some point. And I remember thinking, how powerful is that? This stupid country song is making an impact on him. And then that opened up an opportunity for us to have a conversation about what it's like to go through hell and to be in hell, and the fact that it's not going to last forever and it's not going to determine your destiny. You're in charge of that, not what the past has given you, Yeah. And so now we still have a great relationship, and that's, again, almost 20 years later, so so taking those little moments to just be a part of somebody's life and support them in small ways is huge. And again, I don't know why that story came in my mind, but it just did. So yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you shared that. I'm curious what your experience has been like now as a father to boys. And obviously, you put a lot of value and importance in learning these skills. What does that look like now with the boys? It's a challenge, it really is, because you want to let them be boys. You want to let them play. You want to let them learn things. at the same time, my goal is to be that supportive father for them and to teach them about life lessons. And the main things that I want to teach my boys is not necessarily academic based, because I think that'll come and develop as they become younger men. But I want to teach them how to be good people.
Yeah.
And do good things and be kind and emotional regulation and develop good coping skills and those kind of patterns. Those are the most important things to me to teach my boys. Obviously reading, writing, arithmetic, all that stuff is important, right? But you won't get anywhere with that stuff if you don't have emotional regulation.
100%.
If you don't know how to control your anger or your urges, if you don't know how to talk to people or be around people. So that pro-social development is what I really am trying to focus on with my boys.
Yeah.
And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. I want to retract my comment just for some reason that I think I knee-jerk reaction said 100%, but you know what? Like, I think one of the biggest problems within our society is that folks without those abilities actually do get somewhere, get into positions of power because of their academic skills or maybe even just like social skills, like where they're very charming or their ability to, build new connections or whatever, but they don't ultimately have that self-knowledge, that ability to, really know who they are, manage themselves appropriately, manage their thoughts, feelings, and emotions so that they can actually do work that is going to impact more than maybe just their smaller circle. Because I what's coming to mind for me is a few stories specific to this area, to St. John's and to Newfoundland, because I've been away for a while. Recently, moved home about 2 years ago now. And, my fiance, Dana, has lived here for a much longer time than me and is more aware of, say, like the political landscape here. So we get into those conversations often, and I hear stories of things, things that have gone down and just different situations. Like there's so many buildings downtown that are closed now.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just one example of what I'm trying to get out here is, so many buildings downtown that are closed. Rent is extremely high. You know what I mean? And some of them aren't even being rented out. Like they're not available for rent. They want them to stay closed. And I'm just like, well, what exactly is going on there that is keeping, you know what I mean? Because like it messes up tourism for one. Like you're going downtown and you're seeing all these shops closed. Like what the heck is going on down here? Right. Yeah. It cuts opportunities for entrepreneurs like Moo Moo's ice cream. That's been empty now for how long?
It was so sad. My boys were devastated when that place closed because they'd love to go there,
Yeah. But just the point that I'm taking a long time to get out here is that I feel like, despite the fact that I said 100%, I agree with you that it takes, a lot more than just say academic skills to get somewhere in life. I feel like, you know what? People do get somewhere in life with just that. And then they get into these positions of power and they're making decisions for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Selfish decisions probably. And if you're not focused on other people and that pro-social development, then you're going to make selfish decisions and not worry about the community at large. You're going to worry about yourself and what probably lines your own pockets or whatnot. But,
absolutely.
I think that's the most important for me. I want to grow good people, and so hopefully that's what I end up doing. When my grandmother died many moons ago, the last thing she said to me was, "You be good." And I said, "Okay, I'll try."
You be good.
So, you be good, and that was as simple as that. And I remember thinking like how powerful. It's like funny, but it's powerful at the same time. Like just be good. That's all I want from people, and that's what I want from my boys.
That's fantastic, but that's also such a Nan comment. Such a Nan comment. A Newfoundland Nan. You be good now. You lost weight. Have you had enough?
Oh no, they'd never say that to me. They'd always tell me I was getting chunky, right?
That's amazing. And that was legitimately her last words. One of the last things she said to you.
To me, yeah.
To you, yeah. You be good. That's what I'll call the podcast. You be good with Jason Walsh.
There you go, man. You call it whatever you want. Yeah.
Well, one last thing, man. I'd love to just hear about, like, on a day-to-day basis. What are the things that you do to keep yourself in check, to stay sane, to stay healthy, to stay happy, to bring, your best self to work?
Well, I think for me personally, I try not to bring work home
Sure.
as much as possible. There are times, especially now, my current position is in child abuse and sexual assault unit. So that's something that's very difficult not to bring home. So when I investigate a file that is so tragic and is causing someone's life to be turned completely upside down by a sexual assault or child abuse situation, that's hard not to bring home, especially when I see my young boys and I encounter them.
Yeah.
But I really do try to have a clear division between my work life and my home life. I think that for me is a high priority.
I just want to jump in real quick. So practically, how do you implement that? Like, are you having conversations with colleagues, with other officers? You're doing the EAP. Is that right? Is that the?
Yeah. So, those are options. For me, it's just a little bit of self-talk. So a lot of times when I'm driving on the way home, I've got that few minutes of a drive on the way home. And my goal is by the time I get home to have those emotional, intrusional thoughts that are there based on what I'm experiencing at work to be set aside as much as possible. Now, are they going to flare back up when I get home? It's possible. But a positive self-talk for me has been a way to kind of cope with that,
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of my goals. When it comes to fitness, I've never been super physically fit. I've never been this, great athlete.
Sure.
But practicing some physical fitness is very important to me as well. I find that helps clear my head. There's times when my wife will look at me and she'll recognize that I'm twisted. I'm a little bit frustrated or I'm upset, and she'll look at me and she'll just say, "Jason, go down to the basement for a bit." Okay, sounds good. So I'm so glad that she recognizes that, because sometimes I don't. And then by the time I do a little half-hour workout session, I come up, I feel better.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that. I think I don't expect great physical fitness from anybody, but I think that practicing some physical fitness is important for people with regards to their mental health, whether it's a quick walk or a quick run or go on a rower or do whatever, something simple, I think is important. And again, spending time with my family. So I have to prioritize that, and just time with my kids without looking at Instagram or Facebook or staring at my phone every 5 seconds. When I'm out with my kids, the only time I'm taking out my phone is to take a picture of them while they're, doing something cute. And that's about it. And I'll share that with some family and friends and occasionally on Instagram or Facebook. But the goal is for me to stay away from that. Another thing that I've done for myself personally is I don't look at any media when I'm not at work. So news media in particular. Not that there's anything wrong with news media. They're fulfilling a role in society. They're doing their job, I guess, to a certain point. But I've found that I live the media. As a police officer, I see it, I experience it. I'm part of that on a regular basis. And when I'm looking at that, when I get home, I find that makes my mental health even more challenging. Yeah. Because I'm thinking about the officers that responded to that. Is the story correct? What else is going on behind the scenes? Yeah. This is missing stuff. And then it floods my mind with things. So I intentionally stay away from all news media while I'm not working, and try to limit social media. I think that's important. Do a bit of physical fitness, spend time with my family, and try to kind of balance that work life, home life as much as possible.
Yeah, I asked because I knew it would be answers just like that. Foundational things that I think everybody, maybe outside of the social media cutoff, I absolutely get that for your situation because you're living it 100%, especially when it's local. Yeah. But everything else there, that's foundational stuff. You know what I mean? I think all men need to realize the connection between their mental health and their physical health. That's huge. And it doesn't have to be, a 5-day-a-week, 1 hour long workout session each time type thing. But I find myself saying to guys often that, when the emotions are building, when, the stress of life is getting bigger, your focus, your time put into processing, your energy put into processing that has to also increase. And sometimes that requires physical exertion. I know for me, I just had a conversation with a personal trainer. And I said, for me, like, if I'm not lifting heavy weight once in a while, I don't really get it all out of me. Yeah. I can do like a like a high intensity type of workout where my heart rate's up, but unless I'm lifting something that is close to your max, you know what I mean? We'll say that. That's what really like exhausts me, gets it out of me, and I usually feel the best after something heavy like that. But that being said, it's foundational to have some type of physical exercise rather, and you have a basement that your wife sends you to.
That's right. Yeah. That she sends me to. Yeah, I got my little gym set up there. I tell my friends I call it Dad Bod Fitness Center. And, it's a good spot, Yeah, but I need it, and I need to push through something. So I need to reach a point where I kind of want to quit a little bit and then push through.
Yeah.
In a workout, and so that's what I try to push myself to do, and it's very helpful. I would recommend anyone to do it. It's like we were saying earlier. It's like you said with Cortez in your conversation. It's not just mental health. It's not just physical health. It's not just spiritual or emotional health. It's a balance of all those things. And so if you're leaning too far on one side, then you're going to impact the other. And that's what we need to try to do: find that balance, right?
Yeah. I think that's foundational, man. Yeah. Well, Jason, I have never come across you in your role as an RNC officer, and hopefully I may not. I'm
looking for you.
You're watching for me? Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, shout out to my brother who works with you, who did kind of pull me over once, but I think
did he?
Yeah, that was just a power move.
Yeah,
he could, so he did.
Yeah.
But dude, I always appreciated having you, knowing you, having you as a friend. I'm sure you're a fantastic police officer. You were great as a youth care worker, and
I really tried to make a difference there, and that's
you most definitely did.
I try to do it in policing as well. It's I'm no different than anybody else in my community, but by the grace of God or whatever, I ended up in this position, and I got some opportunities in life that some other people didn't, and I can never forget that. I'm not above anybody in my community. Not by a long shot.
And I'm not praising you up just because you're on the podcast. I mean, I appreciate authenticity. I appreciate people who are able to bring themselves to their role. And I felt like I knew you after working with you only a short while, and you're the same guy now that you were back then. And it's good to know that you're on the force.
Good, man. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you for listening. I hope you found some value in this episode. If you have, be sure to share the Ockery podcast with a friend and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can find the Ockery on socials at The Ockery and on the web at theockery.com.